从不为失去动容，让自己弥补透风。
Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk. I'm Jordan Schneider here today with Matt Sheehan. He is a fellow at the Paulson Institute, the creator of the Chinafornia newsletter, and an author of the upcoming book of the same name. Matt, welcome to the podcast. So before we jump into Chinafornia and some recent pieces you've written on the interaction between the Golden State and the Middle Kingdom, I'm curious how you first got into China. What first got you hooked and kept you in the country?
I first went over pretty much by chance in summer of 2008, which is between my sophomore and junior years in college. I had wanted to go somewhere in Asia that summer, and I ended up getting a job as a academic camp counselor, sort of like a TA at an academic summer camp in Beijing. And that was my first time in China, my first time in Asia, my first time in a country like that's sufficiently different from the U.S. I'd been to Mexico and to Europe, but China just kind of blew me away from the very beginning, from landing there. So I spent a summer there in Beijing, traveled a little bit to Sheehan and to Shanghai, and just had a blast and knew instantly that I needed to move back there after graduating. So I graduated college in 2010. I took like 2 quarters of Mandarin before I finished and got a teaching job in Xi'an. So I moved back there 2010, was in Xi'an for a year, and then made my way to Beijing and kind of went through the somewhat standard, teach English, study Chinese, find a job, find a better job, eventually find a job that you're, happy with.
And how do you think your experience changed over time over those years?
I mean, obviously, the deeper that you get into the language and the culture and sort of the friend networks that you're able to build up there, your experience kind of gets richer as you go. So by the end of my time there in 2006, the beginning of 2016, I really felt very, very much at home. I had good friends all over the country. Had a job that I really liked, working as the correspondent for the Huffington Post, and it was really comfortable, and that was great. But I also, looking back, I really treasure my first year there in Xi'an. I was going into it very fresh, and the feeling of walking around a city like that, even when you barely understand what's going on around you, barely understand what people are saying, but it just feels like every day is such a discovery and so much food for thought. And I really think that was one of the most special years in my life. So, the whole journey is exciting, and I like the comfort and the fluency at the end, but I really like that early stage of discovery too.
Sure. So, what brought you to the idea of working in between California and China? What drew you to the themes inherent in this story?
Yeah. So I grew up mostly in the Bay Area. I grew up in Palo Alto and went to school at Stanford, so I had a lot of California connections behind me. And I started going more back and forth between the two places in 2013. That's when I actually broke my ankle in Beijing. The Beijing doctor who looked at my X-ray for about 2 seconds just looked at me like, "Mei Shar," and no problem. And he and kind of dismissed me while I had this watermelon-sized ankle. When I flew back to California, the doctors told me that it was, very bad. I should not have flown because it's dangerous to fly with a broken leg. And I ended up having to stay in California for a couple months. So at that time was really when you were starting to see the ramp up in foreign real estate purchases and EB5, stuff like that. So I did, I think 2 stories at that time, one on students going back and forth between the places, and one on Chinese real estate purchases in Palo Alto, where I grew up. So I sort of got a taste of it then. And very soon after that is when I got my job with the Huffington Post. And that was a job back in China, but the visa process was a hot mess. So I spent about 7 or 8 months waiting for my visa in California. And during that time, really saw how vibrant and multidimensional the relationship was. So I could see a lot of Chinese tech people, tech investors and coders and, just recent graduates in Silicon Valley, the real estate purchases, the students going back and forth, some of the early China Hollywood interactions. I just thought this was a really exciting window into one possible future for the U.S.-China relationship, the one that's kind of more productive, more face-to-face, more of a actual like exchange of ideas and culture and stuff like that, along with all the money. And so I got pretty excited about that. And there was also a girl in the mix, my now girlfriend, who I met and got together with during that time. And I made some promises about coming back to California that I had to fulfill, or that I chose to fulfill, because I wanted to come home and be with her. So I moved back in 2016 and took up the Chinafornia mantle full time.
Sure. So diving a little deeper into this, could you give us a little bit more of the perspective you learned about the relationship?
Sure. So
historical perspective, excuse me.
Historical perspective. So that's one of the coolest and most interesting things about looking at Chinafornia here, about the fact that so much of this activity in the present day is going down here in San Francisco and LA. These are two of the places that were also the birthplace of sort of face-to-face U.S.-China relations, with the early waves of immigrants coming here, the project of building the railroad, a lot of the anti-Chinese sentiment that went on in the 1880s and 90s, leading to the Chinese Exclusion Act. So you have really deep roots that also turned into, long-lasting communities here. And it really feels like we're coming full circle in the present day. Because back then, the Chinese immigrants that were coming were often, very low social status in their home country, sort of desperately leaving, ending up here being very low social status in the United States, and, getting kind of beat up on by the predominantly white establishment. And, you fast forward, 130 years, 140 years or so, and suddenly when the next time you have a very large immigration wave, not from Hong Kong and Taiwan in the 70s and 80s, but in the present day from the mainland, and the social status has completely flipped around. The relative wealth of the people that are showing up relative to the people that are already here has been completely flipped around. Nowadays, many of the Chinese immigrants, not all of them, but many of the immigrants and students and investors, they're very wealthy. They're purchasing, $1 million homes by the dozen, or they're paying full tuition at California universities, or buying up startups, or funding Hollywood films. And so to watch that complete reversal in relative wealth and status between the two sides is really interesting, because you can also see some of the backlash, or the feelings of people who are not happy about necessarily like the home purchases. It's kind of a weird mirror image reflection of what was going on back in the day. I wouldn't equate any local backlash in the present day with the Chinese Exclusion Act, but you see some similar rhetoric around. Back in the day. It was low wage Irish laborers like my great granddad who were angry because the Chinese were, quote, taking their jobs, driving down their wages. And in the present day, if you look around or keep your ear to the street, there's a lot of rhetoric about the Chinese who are driving up housing prices and, filling up the neighborhood with empty houses and stuff like that. So it's a weird twist and coming full circle with the history.
So you sort of got to this, but are there any other central contradictions of the China-California relationship today?
Central contradictions in the communist Marxist orthodoxy sense?
Absolutely.
I think you have a lot of tensions, at the very least, from the Chinese government side. You have tensions around what they want and what they're getting. The Chinese government, when it looks to California, one of the reasons that the relationship is so rich between Hollywood and China and Silicon Valley and China is because these places have a lot of what the Chinese government sees in its future. The Chinese government wants to transition away from this, sort of low value add industrial manufacturing export economy to a high value add service based, innovation based, culture and consumption based economy. And it just so happens that the two meccas of these things, of culture, global sort of popular culture and global innovation, are right here in California. So the government certainly wants a piece of that, but they also don't necessarily want the cultural, ideological underpinnings of that. They don't want the freedom of expression that a lot of people would say is pretty central to Hollywood. They don't want the disruptive in a cultural, political sense aspect of Silicon Valley. And so that's a bit of the government's tension there. They want to take this stuff, but they also want it to be grown in China with Chinese characteristics. They want to buy what they can buy, and they want to take it home and learn how to do it themselves. From California's perspective, something that you see a lot at like universities around here or with tech companies or neighborhoods, I think it's most clear with the universities. They want the Chinese tuition dollars, but they don't necessarily want their schools to become, kind of a hideout or dominated by wealthy Chinese students. A lot of the parents are concerned that that we're essentially auctioning seats in the UC system or admittance to the UC system, auctioning it to the highest bidder. But if we're not willing to fund our schools ourselves, then this is kind of what we're left with. So I see tensions on both sides of that, what the Chinese government or its companies are wanting and getting, and also California's desire for those investment dollars and tuition dollars, but sort of being a little bit leery about the cultural, results of that.
Sure. So, coming down a little more to the people-to-people level, you are also a tour guide for Chinese tourists. One of my favorite pieces of relatively recent journalism was Evan Osnos jumping on a Chinese tour bus and driving around Europe. And I'm curious kind of how what the folks are interested in, what questions and observations they've had that have surprised you, and kind of how they react to just San Francisco as a city.
Yeah, so most of the tours that I've done have either been around Stanford, Silicon Valley, or further north, like in wine country, Napa up there. So, I love showing them around Stanford. I grew up around there. I went to school there, and I just love that campus. I think it's an incredible place to explore. So I have a lot of fun with it. I take them around depending on who it is. If it's parents and kids, I might play Frisbee with them. If it's more of a corporate delegation, we might make the rounds at the various technology campuses and stuff like that. In terms of what they are looking for and what I'm trying to share with them, what I'm always trying to do when I introduce California or Silicon Valley to Chinese people is I'm trying to really give them a sense that there's of the cultural underpinnings of things that they know or like or think are great. I think Chinese culture or Chinese people, they have a tendency to be very into sort of rank orderings and what is number one, what is officially the number one school and officially the number one tech company. There's kind of a tendency to lean towards those rankings. And so people are like, oh, Stanford, officially, this is officially a great school. And what I always want to try to say is, well, yeah, I do think it's a great school, but the reasons are, it's not because like US News and World Report ranked it X, Y, or Z, or because it has like whatever number of Nobel Prize winners. It's all that stuff grew out of a grassroots, ground up, like cultural environment. And so that's what I'm always trying to share with them. And it can be a little bit hard to communicate that sometimes, or to get people outside of that box of thinking that everything is kind of a top-down ranking. One of the more interesting things is also trying to relay to them how unstructured and sort of culture-based certain institutions are. Like the idea of Silicon Valley. A lot of people are, when they came here, or when they come here, they ask me like, we're on, Stanford campus, we're in Palo Alto, like, where is Silicon Valley? I'm like, we're in Silicon Valley right now. Like Silicon Valley is an idea. Silicon Valley is sort of a general area. It's an idea layered over a general area, but it's not like a county or a city or something like that. And I heard a similar anecdote from a friend of mine who works with Chinese people in film, where I think it was in 2008, he was talking to the deputy minister of culture in Beijing. And the deputy minister of culture went up to him and said, I want you to tell me, who is the CEO of Hollywood? Like, there is no CEO of Hollywood. Hollywood is not a company. Hollywood is not, it's a city, I guess, on a map, but really it's kind of a cultural institution. It's a set of ideas and the way people relate to each other in a business ecosystem. And so trying to relay those things to people can be a little bit challenging, but fun. It's what I think is valuable in this stuff.
Sure. I remember driving down Sand Hill Road for the first time and thinking, like, this is it? These are just office parks with, like, fancy names of places I've heard on them. But getting people from another country to process that must be a real challenge. So, transitioning into your recent piece on the Silicon Valley paradox, which sort of bleeds over from your recent comments about the kind of cultural differences between the two tech ecosystems in particularly in Beijing and Silicon Valley. If you could kind of walk us through what you think each side's blind spots are about the city across the Pacific.
Sure, yeah. A piece called Silicon Valley's China Paradox, and it's just trying to pick apart what I see as I guess you'd call it the central contradiction of the current tech relationship, which is that we're seeing really high flows of people, talent, people, money, and ideas, talent, money, and ideas between the two places. But the companies and sort of the internet itself still remains very much divided by national boundaries. You have like grassroots, sort of low-level coders that'll be trained in China, go to grad school in the US, work at Google, and then go back to China. Or some of the reverse. You have some sort of leading people from Silicon Valley who have spent time at Chinese tech companies, Andrew Ng and Hugo Barra and people like that. So you have a lot of flows that way. You have a lot of flows of money, whether that's Chinese sort of seed investment or big companies like Tencent buying up pieces of Tesla and buying up pieces of Snapchat, and the same going back the other way. And also ideas, this cultural sharing, the way that Chinese people look to Silicon Valley as kind of a model of what a tech company should be, of what innovation culture should be, and even some companies like Facebook trying to take a page out of WeChat's book in the way that they build up their own app and try to integrate payments. So you have all this exchange on those levels, but somehow the companies just cannot seem to enter each other's markets. On the US side, going to China, largely because of the firewall, but also because they have a hard time localizing the way Airbnb and Uber have dealt with. And on the Chinese side, they just can't seem to crack the US market. So that's what I see as kind of the paradox or the tension between those two sides. In terms of blind spots, I've summed it up in a way that I think captures at least some of the weaknesses on both sides. It's Silicon Valley's egocentrism versus Chinese companies, tech companies, ethnocentrism. This is an idea that sort of emerged out of a conversation with a friend who's worked at a relatively high level in leading Chinese tech companies and U.S. tech companies. And when he's a white American, and when he was over in China, he was doing good work and working for an elite company. But you notice there is a certain level of ethnocentrism in that China has a very hard time truly absorbing people from other cultures. But they're actually very good at absorbing ideas from other cultures. They're always looking to Silicon Valley for the latest and greatest. They have no sort of, they're very willing to learn from other places, especially Silicon Valley, but also maybe some other countries like India or Southeast Asia. So China, that's their problem, ethnocentrism. They can't absorb the people, but they can absorb the ideas. Silicon Valley, it's kind of the opposite. Over here, we're very good at bringing people in from all over the world, to work in these companies, to get a U.S. education, letting them into, at least in the past, giving them a green card if they can sort of demonstrate sufficient talent and all that. So we're very good at absorbing those people, but we're not so good at absorbing ideas from other places necessarily. In Silicon Valley, there can be a real egocentrism around not thinking that there's nothing to learn from China, thinking there's nothing to learn from Chinese companies or Indian companies. We assume that if our companies don't succeed there, that's probably because of either government protection or because, some weird quirky thing about the local market. But we know that we are truly inventing the future here, and this is kind of the center of all meaningful innovation. So those are the sort of the corresponding strengths and the blind spots: absorbing people but not ideas here in Silicon Valley, and absorbing ideas but not people in China.
Sure. So I don't know if you have any experience with Wang Zhurong, the King's Glory. It's basically like a League of Legends clone on your phone. It was set to launch in the US in November. I think they just pushed it back to the new year, but this is my pick for the first Chinese app, I guess aside from Musical.ly, that's going to absolutely blow up in the US. It is leaps and bounds above any other cell phone game out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing A, if people realize it's a Chinese game, and B, just how big it gets, because of the level of dominance it's established in the Chinese market is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I'm not a gamer, but I've heard plenty about that, and it's actually just recently it's been cool to hear some friends who have nothing to do with China coming to me with certain Chinese cultural artifacts and saying, wow, like, have you checked this out? It's super cool. So a friend who has nothing to do with China did that with the 3-body problem. Another friend who's like deep in, he makes beats. He's like deep in the hip hop beat making scene, coming to me with like Higher Brothers rap music. And I was like, wow, this is like one of the first times that American friends who have nothing to do with China are coming to me with Chinese cultural products and saying, I love this. I dig this stuff. I always feel like in the past that, I love various Chinese cultural products, but I want to love them. I'm kind of invested in that aspect of it. It's cool to see people just getting it, getting it without any presuppositions or without trying to like Chinese cultural things.
Sure. I totally feel you. I think Chinese hip hop was probably my first piece of Chinese culture I just was able to like because I thought it was awesome, not because, for some like instrumental reason of like, oh, this will be good for my Chinese or what have you. So, Chinese hip hop then, were you following, Zhongguo Yoshiha? Did you,
I caught sort of the end of it. I think I got to China when was this? This was in September. In August, September, I got there like during the final few episodes, and I had heard like rumblings of it, but I had not realized just how big it was. And I was at the time I was there for a research trip related to Chinese film, and I sort of got a little like backdoor intro into the hip hop scene in Beijing I ended up on the set of what's called a 网络大电影, like a 网大, a big internet movie, which is kind of like a cheap internet movie that is put online. You can sort of like buy access to it for like 5 kuai or something like that. It's kind of the underground movie making scene in China. But the one that I happened to get connected to was it was called what the Lao Shi rapper, like a kid with a stutter saying my teacher is a rapper, and it was like a Chinese knockoff 8 Mile type movie about a kid with a stutter like losing his stutter by getting into rap, something like that. And so I had a lot of fun. I got to hang out with some like Beijing rappers and sort of assorted hangers-on. But it wasn't until I got there that I realized just how like explosive and big that movie was that TV show was as like a cultural, impetus to getting people into hip hop.
It is really remarkable. So you were here when it was still much more of an underground thing. Could you talk a little bit about hanging around in Chengdu? You wrote a piece a while ago about a Uber protest song.
Yeah. So I went to Chengdu. That would be the late summer of 2015. So it was kind of there had been a couple of hip hop songs that had achieved some degree of fame. The first way that I got out there were 2 rappers there that I wanted to visit. One was named Fat Shady, and he was the creator of maybe the first like viral Chinese hip hop song, which is called 老子明天不上班, like Daddy's not going to work tomorrow. And he was on an earlier Chinese kind of talent show, where most of the people are singing their songs, but he was like the one rapper, and he raps in like Sichuan dialect. And that song went super viral because it just captures that like, diaosi feeling of like, I hate my, city job. Like I don't want to go to work. So I went and I hung out with him and with Mello in tribute, Fat Shady in tribute to Slim Shady, Mello as a tribute to Carmelo Anthony.
Why you would want to pay tribute to him, I have no.
This guy had spent like a year of high school in Denver, like I don't know how long ago, like 5-8 years
All right,
ago.
Denver Carmelo is definitely worth naming yourself after. I take it back.
But anyway, I just got to hang out with them for, a few days over the course of like a week or two, and went to a hip hop show down there and got to sort of see them hanging out. But yeah, it was before the real explosion right now, when there was just kind of one or two rappers. Like at that time, Fat Shady, because his song had been big, he could kind of he was invited to like the open, when a real estate boss wants to open a new building somewhere in third tier Sichuan, he'll like pay Fat Shady like 100,000 kwai or something to come and perform a song and open it. So I went to one of those shows and hung out with Mello. And I mean, they were kind of in typical hip hop way. They were talking a very big game. Or people like Mello were talking a very big game. He's the one who had created the Uber rap, basically calling out like DD and local government officials for hating on Uber, which he loves. And that had briefly gone viral before it was censored. But yeah, he was talking a big game. He's like, give me a couple of years and like we're gonna be going huge, where it's gonna be all like bling, it's gonna be cash money, like fast money and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, maybe, like I don't know, it doesn't really look like it right now.
Kanching Kwang.
Yeah, Kanching Kwang. But yeah, it's happened. Higher Brothers, Mello, I'm not sure if he's like a full-time member of Higher Brothers or if he's associated with them in the past. He's on some tracks with them. But yeah, people like Higher Brothers have completely blown up, and I'm sure some people are getting money, making it rain. So
yeah, it's an exciting time. So the future is in Xinjiang. I don't know if you've heard of any Xinjiang R&B artists or rappers, but this one guy, Akajiang, his English name is like Aiken.
Okay.
I saw in concert recently, and I'll put a link up to, but I think is the most impressive singer I've ever heard in Chinese, and has a really cool style. He's, wears these like suspenders and like, I don't even know how to describe it, but he's a unique voice and like actually a world-class talent. I think he just got signed to some like Xiaomi deal. So if you get on the Akajiang bus now, then you're really you can really brag to all your friends about how you were the first to ride the Uyghur wave. So yeah, keep a lookout for him.
In Urumqi, there was a hip hop group that I don't know if it's still around. I want to say it was called Seven City or something like that. That had its own sort of following and gained some like notoriety. And I was out in Urumqi in 2015 winter. Yeah, Chinese New Year 2015. I was like had an interview set up with them at the last minute. Like, like the political situation right now. It's not the time to be like talking to foreign journalists. They canceled on me. But I'm sure, Xinjiang, just generally the far west has a lot of like swagger, a lot of the hip hop swagger that other parts of China might not necessarily live up to. So I believe.
Cool. So Matt, this was really fun today. If you could, we're going to close with a few, recommendations. First, favorite Chinese rapper.
So I'll give a track, because this is the one track that to me stands above all. The song is called Piao Er Chi Qi Zhou. Like, piao is like a ticket. Chi, to eat, qi zhou is like to get going. I think I put it on my SoundCloud, and I think I translated it as get after that paper. So that's what piar is to them. And that to me is, it's got, Fat Shady has the first verse on it. But then there are two more rappers. I'm forgetting the name of the third one. And the second one is one of the Higher Brothers guy. What's his name? Masawe. So it's, Fat Shady, Masawe, and a third guy. And it's just like a really like fat, like the kind of beat that you would want to have dropped in a club and just kind of get like hypnotic to. And to me, that it just like stands out head and shoulders above all the other Chinese rap tracks that I've heard. So I'm sure you can find it searching around YouTube or Youku. I also have it on my SoundCloud because I embedded it in a story once. But yeah, Fat Shady, Get After That Paper, aka Piao Er Chi Qi Zhou.
Maybe that'll have to take over for the new, all right. It'll be your intro music. How about that? And lastly, a book you would like to read about China in English on a topic that you do not think has been sufficiently covered.
Yeah, I would like a real deep dive on Xi Jinping's governing philosophy. I mean, now they have the official, he's inducted into the Constitution as the
recently translated into Laos.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure the party will define it in its own way, but to me, it's this blend of authoritarianism plus anti-corruption, clean governance, but with zero tolerance for dissent. It's kind of, I think of it as like 21st century, like techno legalism. Like the times when I've had the greatest sort of, I feel like I've seen a vision of what he's talking about is reading like old legalist texts and stuff like that. But an analysis of what he's really trying to get at in areas like legal reform and economic reform, and then an analysis of how this is going to interact with the changes that are going to sweep over the Chinese economy, technological changes through artificial intelligence, facial recognition, the ability to monitor society and also monitor the economy in a much more precise way than has been done in the past. I haven't really seen any book that has put all these pieces together and looked forward at what could be. I think we tend to fall into like, kind of value judgments, like, is he good? Is he bad? Like, do we like this? Do we not like this? But I'd like to see a analysis that just kind of takes it for what it is, takes it on its own terms, and tries to project out where it's going to go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the co-author, classical Chinese scholar and, young up and coming political reporter, I think could create a real bestseller.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, Matt, this was great. Thank you so much.